Live now.
Welcome, everyone, to the Advanced Sports Analytics Podcast. It is Friday, April 2nd. I'm here with Stewart Gibson. Stewart and I are going to go over a little bit of NBA and a little bit of MLB. Stewart, how was your night last night in NBA? I have to say, it's been a bad couple weeks, but it was a very satisfying night last night to make a strong late swap. It was evident that I was up against some Kawhi, and I couldn't win with Kawhi, and went to my man Aaron Gordon, and he came through in a big way. Just barely nipped the other lineup, so that was super satisfying. How about you?
Yeah, I did okay. I think just below break even. So I don't know. Maybe that's not okay, but I kind of have been not doing a lot of cash play on SuperDraft lately, mostly just focusing on the tournaments, and had some strong lineups going into the late game, lots of New Orleans value. Had guys we talked about on the show the other day, and Pirtle and DeRozan. Got a lot of overtime equity from those games, but had some people catch me with the late game. Did also make some swaps off like Kennard and Mann once Paul George got ruled in to Porter and Gordon. So benefited from the Gordon swap, not so much Michael Porter, but I don't know, didn't get all my money taken. So I don't know, on to the next one.
Well, unlike many very quantitative sites, we are a fan of the eyeball test. We're very quantitative, but we also believe in the eyeball test. And I will say, every time that I take the night to watch a lot of NBA games, I'm very happy I did, because you really do learn a lot, I think. And one of the things we learned last night from watching the Nuggets is that Aaron Gordon is a new player. He is a highly motivated player. He was not a highly motivated player in Orlando. I think we can expect a different level of production from Aaron Gordon.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think keep pretty tight, like recency, I guess, metrics on some of our projections. So yeah, I would expect kind of those boosts in efficiency to kind of show through and start to matriculate to his projections. We were quite high on him last night, certainly as guys like Kawhi kind of receded in projection following Paul George getting ruled in. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on there in Denver, and also think how that his addition to the mix there affects some of the other Denver players that we've kind of gotten to know over the course of this year. Definitely incorporating that into how we think about projecting to Denver, I think, is going to be pretty important.
So a big thing was that he was putting in extreme effort on defense, and we've noted that on SuperDraft, blocks and steals are worth 3 points. Similar to FanDuel scoring in that way, the defensive stats weight very highly, but you also get the multiplier on that. So we have 1.65 multiplier times 3 points for each block and steal. And Reggie Miller in the broadcast booth was noting that he just looked like a completely different player on defense. He just putting in extreme effort on defense and looked like a threat to block shots or make steals the whole game.
Yeah, that's something he wasn't doing a whole lot of in Orlando. So it'd be interesting to see if he kind of continues that in Denver.
So let's jump into the slate tonight. We're waiting on a bit of news, but there's a reasonable chance that all of our game time decisions sort of come in and the RotoWire projections hold for tonight. Nickeil Alexander-Walker came in a big way last night. Looks like a very similar setup for him tonight with Ball, Ingram, and Zion out. He should be locked in one of your guard spots. We have him again in 100% of optimals. Um, pretty tough fade, would you say? Especially with Josh Hart out as well, it seems like he would be sort of a crazy fade.
Yeah, I mean, even when it was just Lonzo out, like Alexander Walker was, I think, had a prominent role for New Orleans. And then like last night, he just looked like the guy. And with Hart now out too, it just like Alexander Walker just had such a higher usage rate than Bledsoe. I thought like Bledsoe and Hart, were guys that could have challenged for kind of that dominant role in New Orleans. And, Alexander Walker was the guy. And, there's just one less, potential threat in Hart that's in the lineup tonight. It's just going to be, NAW and Bledsoe. And yeah, I mean, Alexander Walker just dominated the ball compared to Bledsoe. Bledsoe ended up having a productive night, but from a usage standpoint, like it was all Alexander Walker. I would expect that to continue tonight. I do think, one caveat is like that game went into overtime. Bledsoe, I think, played like 45 minutes. Alexander Walker, I think, also played in the mid 40s. Kind of a tough stretch for these guys to be going back to back. Alexander Walker's young, Bledsoe not quite as much. It will be interesting. I mean, they're super thin on bodies, but you have guys coming off a 45-minute game back to back. Like that's a pretty tough draw. So I do wonder if they're. I don't know. I'm not really sure what New Orleans is going to do. I could see some rest, not rest risk, but just like reduced minutes for some of these guys that played in the high 30s up into the 40s last night. You think that's a possibility? Or are they going to give these guys kind of the full run?
I think they'll get run. I played Steven Adams in some important spots last night. And it didn't, the threat was that they would give Jackson Hayes a lot of run. He didn't get a ton of run. I expect that he gets a lot of run tonight, but they're pretty thin. I mean, James Johnson never really goes that deep in a game. I think these guys will run. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker will get a lot of play. I think Jackson Hayes will get a lot of play. Steven Adams will still rate okay. Yeah, so I'm still going to lock him in.
All right. And yeah, I mean, there's bound to be a lot of value on that New Orleans side. Outside of New Orleans, are there any other guards that are kind of bubbling to the top for you as far as projectability as the injury kind of situation stands right now?
Well, I think we'll lock in Bogdanovich with now poor Atlanta. No Hunter, no Reddish, no Gallinari, no Collins, no Trae Young. So, yeah, I think Bogdanovich will also be a lock, and we have him that way in projections. Don't see any real risk there. He's 1.75 multiplier. I think he's just a stone lock. His multiplier is lagging a bunch of things. It's lagging. His minutes were down off injury for a while. They've been trending up. The multiplier is lagging that situation a little bit. And then, of course, it's lagging the injury situation in Atlanta. So I consider him a lock as well. In tournaments, you could let's play a little Lou Williams.
Yeah, so we
1.8.
Yeah, I think Williams is going to be interesting if he gets announced as part of the starting lineup for Atlanta, which RotoWire currently is projecting him as in the starting lineup. It'll be interesting to see whether they go Lou Will. I do think there's a chance like guy like Brandon Goodwin slides into the starting lineup. We'll kind of have to see what Atlanta does. But yeah, if Lou Williams gets announced as part of the starting lineup, and he's only played in like the low teens, like 10. I think he played 10 minutes last night for Atlanta. Like if we can project him for more than just this kind of paltry like 12-minute workload, his usage, his permanent usage is always there. So yeah, I think that's going to be kind of a starting lineup dependent situation for Lou Will.
So we tend to be a bit high on Devin Booker. We have Devin Booker in 40% of optimals right now. We have Bledsoe in 19% of optimals, which is fine for cash games. Might even be a good way to go for cash games. But is not recommended for tournaments so much because we prefer Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You could, in 10% of your lineups or so, just play Bledsoe instead of Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Booker, he is just a high volatility guy. And for cash games, I just go ahead and play him in spots like this. But there is risk. And Phoenix is a 13.5 point favorite, relatively high total. I don't think that's a bad thing for Booker. I will go ahead and play Booker in cash tonight, but people should just keep in mind that Booker is a high volatility guy in general.
Yeah, for him, like, he's not a super high efficiency score, but he just has these nights where he just takes over the game. I mean, I was looking at his usage charts coming into tonight, and like, he just has these games where he'll go for like 40% usage, meaning that he is either accounting for a shot or an assist, which he doesn't really do that much of. So just accounting for a shot or turnover on like 40% of the possessions in which he's on the floor, which is like a staggering number. I mean, the kind of top usage rates seasonally in the league are like in the mid 30s, and he just has these games where he'll like take over the game. So yeah, I think he's kind of a can be a high volatility guy, not through the prototypical like volatility, I guess, structure. Like, it's really, he just has these games where he just has monster usage. So yeah, I tend to think of him more as kind of a viable tournament play than cash play, but we're certainly projecting him at a level where he could be considered within a cash core.
So tonight is similar to last night, where we have some very strong plays at guard. The cash game lineup is evident. Who are the guards with pop for tournaments?
Well, I mean, I think some of the cash game kind of cores also have just like so much pop. I mean, Alexander Walker and Bogdanovic feel difficult to fade for tournaments. I mean, De'Aaron Fox is always a guy I think worth playing in tournaments and in cash. Has a good, minutes role. He's in the high, mid to high 30s with kind of regular consistency. Can get there with steals, is a decent shot blocker for a point guard. So I like Fox a good bit. Anthony Edwards continues to kind of keep up a high, high usage role with Malik Beasley back. I do think he had his first maybe game in which he was under 20 field goal attempts with Beasley back. There was a stretch there. Yeah, he was 16 shots in the last game. He had 22 shots in every game in which Beasley has been back. I still think I'm buying him as kind of this mid 30, approaching 20 shots per game type role. It appears even with Beasley back. So I think Edwards is still in play for tournaments. Probably given the value on the slate, he's maybe not a cash consideration, but I think definitely viable for tournament purposes.
Yeah, I can get behind that. And maybe also a scattering of John Morant.
Sure.
On the forward side, we love James Johnson, also a very high volatility guy. He was a great member of the Miami Heat. I used to love to watch him. His career has evolved in a way where he really just plays this role, just stepping in as a filler. He has a lot of volatility in this spot. I would expect that with no Ingram, no Zion, and in a strong matchup, I think that he will have a good day. Just keep in mind that he does pepper the box score a bit, and when you have a high multiplier guy who gets some of his points from blocks and steals and that kind of thing, it's just a high volatility projection in general. And don't be too surprised if he burns you, but I will play him anyway in cash games.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a good spot as with NAW and Bledsoe. Like, there's just a ton of opportunity available with Zion and Ingram and Hart all being out. There's kind of I think New Orleans is quite thin in this like forward kind of swingman type position, and I think Johnson could fill that. Could see like Iwundu in there, but if they run the same scheme that they did last night, figures to be a lot of minutes for Johnson, and Ingram, Hart rather being out, maybe would create even more minutes for Johnson. So yeah, I like that call a good bit. I'm interested in Gordon Hayward. Again, he's kind of always towards the top of our projections, or at least has been since Ball went out. I think it's a good spot for Charlotte. They are kind of a average to slightly below average team as far as tempo goes, averaging only roughly 97.5 possessions per 48 minutes over the last month. And they're going up against a quick team in Indiana that's playing up over 101 possessions per 48. So typically like those spots where you can get kind of a slow to average team as far as pace goes, going up against a team that's going to speed them up considerably. I don't think we really see the pace of opponent baked into pricing quite as much. So I do think there's opportunity for Charlotte rather to be playing kind of faster than they usually do. With Ball out, Hayward's been getting a ton of minutes, ton of usage, kind of taking an extra couple shots a game. So do like Hayward a good bit in that spot against Indiana.
Yeah, he burned us a bit last night, but they padded his multiplier a bit. He went from 1.45 to 1.5, and see no reason not to go with him in cash tonight. Now, I think James Johnson and Hayward are somewhat lockish for cash. The third spot we can definitely debate. Kyle Kuzma is the preference of our optimizer with Davis and LeBron out. Does he strike you as definitely your third forward, or do you see it as an open spot?
I mean, I think I'd consider some of like Rashawn Holmes has been hyper productive, and I mean Whiteside's questionable again tonight, but he's been questionable to out like I don't know for the past week. So I'm kind of expecting Whiteside not to play, and if that's the case, I mean Holmes has been a lock for more than 30 minutes a game, kind of settling around like 31, 32 minutes a game. Just a pretty efficient player from, he gets rebounds, can block shots, is an efficient scorer when given the opportunity. And that opportunity has been a little more frequent as of late. So I like Holmes a decent bit. Think I might prefer him a bit to Kuzma. But I do think it's close. Cat, I think, is in consideration. Like 1.15 is not a very healthy multiplier, but he's been paying it off with pretty high frequency as of late. So I think a kind of high floor cash play could be someone like Cat. That would probably be kind of the mix of forwards I might be considering for cash purposes.
Now for center, our optimizer likes Capella a good bit. He seems to have a good matchup. It depends a bit on how much Steven Adams plays. I don't know. He seems a little bit shaky for me at the center position. How do you see center? Our optimizer sprinkles in a little bit of Valanciunas, a little bit of Towns. Probably your safest option might be to just plug Towns in that center spot, huh?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, has kind of the highest floor. Like, he will be a prevalent part of that Minnesota offense. I'm not really too concerned about Capella. Like, I think with Trae Young out, with Gallinari out, who's been playing a decent amount of center minutes, we could see a little bit extra run for Capella. And yeah, I mean, I think he's just going to get some more shot attempts with Young out. Obviously a productive rebounder and shot blocker. So I'm not too concerned about Capella. Valanciunas, I think, also is a strong play. Like, I think that Minnesota-Memphis game is probably the most up-tempo game on the slate. Both those teams are playing really fast, both of them playing over 101 possessions per 48 minutes. And that's, I think going to be a pretty up-tempo game. And Valanciunas, while he's not exceptional in any one facet of his game, he's strong as a rebounder, as a defender. He's an efficient scorer when given the opportunity. And I think, these pace-up games stand to benefit a guy who's a good rebounder, as there's just going to be like more shots taken, more rebounds to be had. So I like Valanciunas a good bit. It's a shame that really you can only play one of those guys. I could see J-Val getting squeezed out in tournaments if guys like Capella are super popular. Towns, will probably get a lot of ownership at the forward. So, people rostering Towns wouldn't exclude you from a guy like Capella or J-Val. But I could see people favoring Capella and maybe not giving J-Val quite the ownership he warrants.
So I believe that covers us for tonight's relatively simple NBA slate. And we're going to do a little bit of a doubleheader and slip over to MLB. I thought our optimizer performed quite well yesterday. Our optimizer on the Advanced Sports Analytics website is under the MLB tab at High Heat Projections. I believe we also have a free version of the MLB optimizer out there. Is that right?
No, we don't. We've done some like free SuperDraft specific projections for football. We don't currently have that for baseball, but it might be something we experiment, I think, later in the season.
So give users a quick explanation of how our MLB optimizer works. With NBA, there's a very simple groups and rules function which allows people to do things like specify the maximum players they want on a team, or lock out certain players, fade certain players, note that they, let's just say, want to play max one of Kyrie and Harden. In MLB, we like to get some within lineup correlation going. We like to stack good plays where possible. How can users efficiently generate rules and stacks within our optimizer?
Yeah, so I mean, I liken MLB strategy kind of to hockey strategy, and quite different from basketball. NBA play, I'm at least personally more focused on creating rules that limit the amount of players that come from the same team. Basketball tends to be a poorly correlated sport where, I'm trying to avoid getting too many players from one team. And it's also, basketball tends to be low variance. So I typically adhere to pretty conservative like bounce rates, usually in like the 5 to 15% range. Baseball and hockey, on the other hand, we're wanting to make sure that all of our lineups have, a minimum of some group of players. Like for SuperDraft, you have six hitters, 2 pitchers. We want to build lineups that have at least, one set of like 3 players on the same team to take advantage of kind of correlative nature of MLB scoring. I'm still kind of in the early stages of trying to experiment with what that right mix is. Do we want to build, I did a mix of like 3-3 stacks last night or yesterday, 4-2, 3-2, 4, just like a single 4-team stack or 4-player team stack. So you can do that in the groups and rules tab. There's a lineup stacking sub tab where you can add to a set of teams that you want to attempt to build stacks on and specify, whether you want, at least X players, I think, from that team. So like, at least 3 players from any one of the, say, 10 teams that we've identified as strong kind of team lineups. And then you can also create kind of not multi-tier, but just like kind of split stacks where you have, 3 single team that has at least 3 players, and then a second team that has at least 2 players to build like a 3-2 stack. So there's functionality to do that. I will tend to set bounce rate pretty high for baseball because it is so high variance. I do want exposure to kind of suboptimal stacks that are suboptimal from a pure projection standpoint, but due to the high variance nature of baseball, have the opportunity to produce tournament winning nights. For basketball, where there's low variance, like I said, keeping the bounce pretty low. I was yesterday, I think, using a bounce rate of like 30 to 35% to try to diversify my stack so that I'm not building 100 lineups that have 70 of them stacking the Dodgers. I want to have, maybe if I like the Dodgers stack, have like 30 to 40% of those lineups as Dodgers, but don't want my larger kind of build to be oversaturated on any one team, even if they do project, most favorably because of the variance in baseball. The likelihood of any one stack being the highest performer on the slate is quite low relative to, I think, basketball, where we can project with reasonable confidence like who's going to be the best, forward or guard or whatever. So yeah, those are some considerations I'm making for using the optimizer, relying on this lineup stack tab where we aggregate the projections of lineups as a whole to identify, looking at the projections tab for which players project most favorably, but looking at the lineup stack tab to identify which teams cumulatively have kind of the strongest projection. I also, for tournament purposes, like preventing pitchers from being rostered in the same lineup as opposing batters that they're facing. And I think also opposing pitchers. Like, I don't want 2 pitchers going against each other because there is, limited win equity. Like, only one of those guys can secure a win. I have less conviction in that stance, I guess. But I definitely think, preventing tournament lineups from rostering batters and opposing pitchers makes a ton of sense. There's just huge negative correlation there that isn't very useful for tournament purposes. So looking, I guess, at individual plays, I guess we can start with pitcher. It's, kind of the most selective and restrictive position. Are there any pitchers that are jumping out to you as, guys you want to roster and kind of build lineups around?
Well, tonight is a somewhat strange slate in that we have a bit of a short slate. We have six games. We have some low totals. We have Tampa Bay at Miami, 7.5. We have 3 8.5 totals and 1 8 total. So we've got low total games. And then we have Trevor Bauer pitching for the Dodgers at Coors Field. Bauer, one of the best pitchers in the major league. LA is a 250 favorite, 12-run total for the game. So on the hitting side, the Dodgers are going to be a strong play. Last night, the Miami Stadium was very good to pitchers. I believe in the big tournament on DraftKings, the top lineup had the two opposing pitchers in Miami. The MLB changed the baseball this season, and one could speculate that it would have the most impact in fields like the Miami Stadium because it's a low-scoring field in general. If I go to a lot of games in Miami, it seems like a tall order to hit the ball out of that park in general. It's a nice heavy Miami air, and it's a big park. It's quite tough for scoring runs. And if they have, well, MLB has announced that they've changed the baseball. They've changed it in a way that makes the ball less lively. They haven't quantified exactly how much less lively. We're just going to have to learn as the data comes in. But one can speculate that the hitter-unfriendly ballparks are even more hitter-unfriendly this year. So I think you'll be well-served to aggressively target pitchers in the Miami park. San Diego, also historically very much a pitcher's park, very, very big stadium. They have the marine layer. It can be just very hard to hit the ball out of that stadium. So tonight, I think Snell against Arizona is a very strong play. Also, in terms of macro changes for the season, the trend has been for a very long time that the average pitch count is going down. The expectation is that it's going to go down even at a faster rate this season. So we're just going to see very few pitchers break the 100 pitch count. You could argue that might be good for a pitcher like Snell that doesn't go so deep into games. Everyone sort of converges around the medium pitch count. And I guess the reason why we might see pitch counts come down this year, first of all, there's just such a clear relationship between volume and injury, and that has become more and more apparent. Secondly, the data is suggestive of a very big improvement for batters when it's the third time around, and even more so the fourth time around the order. So you just do better, like having your strong pitchers relieved at a relatively early point of 90 pitches or so. That's a long answer. I like Snell as my favorite, and I'll take Pablo Lopez in the Miami Stadium as my second favorite.
Yeah, no, those are the two top pitchers that we are projecting as of now. I do like those calls. It'll be interesting to see, Snell kind of relieved from that Tampa Bay situation where he, I think that Tampa Bay managerial staff were kind of very dependent on the Tampa Bay bullpen. They really trusted their bullpen, and that was kind of the cohort of their team that they were, investing, I think, most of their win equity in. And, now that Snell is removed from Tampa Bay, where, at times he was limited as far as the amount of innings he was able to throw. We've seen Glass now, obviously, has been on, short pitch leash. Snell now in San Diego, it'd be interesting to see if he is managed similarly, or if there's maybe a little more, a longer leash for him. So yeah, I like both those guys. I think good, just good game environments as far as stadium. The Vegas totals seem to reflect pretty low scoring expectancy. I'm seeing that Miami game currently at a 7.5. Run total. San Diego down at 8. So those might actually be the two lowest totals on the slate. And I don't want to equate like low run total with pitcher projectability, because I do think that sometimes something that gets I think overstated. Like, people try to roster pitchers around run prevention the same way people try to roster goalies in hockey around goal prevention, when in reality, I think what we're targeting is kind of optimizing towards strikeouts. And, obviously pitchers that prevent runs are going to stay in the game longer and expose themselves to more strikeout opportunity. But, I don't want to try to sound like it's like all right, well, let's just pick the pitchers with the lowest game total. The projections are a function of game total, but also latent, like, strikeout rate of pitchers, or not even strikeout rate, but whiff rate of pitchers, cumulative whiff rate of the lineup that they're facing. I think last year Tampa Bay had kind of a elevated strikeout rate as a team, or whiff rate as a team. So I know we've talked a bit about like the components of the optimizer, but understanding the information that's baked into these projections, game total, implied run total, and kind of team odds are incorporated into that, but there's also a lot of underlying stuff like whiff rate of opponents, how opponents fare against the handness of a pitcher. So those things appear to be lining up quite well for Snell and Lopez. They also have nice multipliers on them compared to a guy like Bauer, who is, I think has a fine raw projection. It's not great because he's in Colorado, but then when you factor in that he's only 1.05x, the most costly, most expensive pitcher on the slate, definitely going to prefer going for some of these guys with healthier multipliers like Snell or Lopez. We've got a pretty strong projection on Andrew Heaney for the Angels going up against a potent Chicago offense. I think that's a case of a guy who could be exposed to give up a decent amount of runs, but also a pretty strong strikeout pitcher. So guys like Heaney or Luzardo, I think, could be in play for those strikeout purposes. That kind of, for me, would be the core of pitchers I'm going to be building through most likely. Obviously, getting sprinkles of some of these less projectable pitchers like Yarborough, who is effective but frequently doesn't get a whole lot of opportunity, given he's kind of this long reliever type. Kikuchi, and I've played a lot of Kikuchi in like season-long fantasy, and he tends to get wrecked. I think we're also pretty high on the San Francisco offense as a whole relative to their multiplier. So won't be playing too much Kikuchi, I would expect. Christian Javier for Houston, that's a good pitcher's ballpark. Javier was fairly effective last year, but just not a huge strikeout pitcher. So I think there's not a ton of fantasy projectability there. But yeah, those are some names that I am kind of keeping an eye on.
And on the hitter side, I have kind of a hard stop at 3:30, so I wanted to hit on a macro topic instead of really drilling in hitter by hitter. We can give some names at the end, but I wanted to put on people's minds the idea that our optimizer has shown a strong tendency towards high multiplier hitters. So if you look at our optimizer in general, we are not on a lot of Mookie Betts, Cody Bellinger, Trevor Story, Mike Trout. We really prefer the high multiplier guys. In fact, we like hitters really above a 1.5 multiplier when we can find them. So, what do you suppose the intuition is there? Because I would guess that your typical person who just puts in a lineup by hand would have at least a scattering of the top hitters in baseball.
Yeah, so I think our projections, you hear the term like median projection thrown around a lot. I think our projections kind of tend more towards mean projections, which I think are pretty useful for tournament purposes. Like, take, for example, just a crude example, a guy who has really four, two distinct outcomes, right? They can score 0 points, which they score at a 75% frequency, and they score 20 points at a 25% frequency. The median projection, the median outcome for that player is 0, but in actuality, the mean outcome there is a quarter of 20, so 5 fantasy points. Like, that player is a very strong player to consider for tournament purposes. Our projections, I think, tend to skew towards mean projections, trying to minimize projection error, which is a mean measure as opposed to median. So I would think that is kind of the thinking there, and why we tend to see that. These guys with low multipliers like Betts, Story, Trout, they have exceptionally high floors. Like, the probability that they score 0 fantasy points is so much lower than some of the other, like, even just take Will Smith on that Los Angeles team. Like, 0 is a fairly likely outcome for him. Certainly more likely than a guy like Mookie Betts, who is batting higher in the batting order, has more base running equity, is just, I think, a better contact hitter. But I think the mean projection obviously is higher for Betts, but when you factor in the multiplier where there's kind of lifting up of the projections of some of these kind of more skewed players, like, I think these high multiplier guys tend to have very skewed outcomes where they have a high propensity of 0 fantasy point outcomes, but they do have access to roughly the same ceiling that some of these, maybe not the same ceiling, but they have access to, like, similar 75th percentiles. Maybe not similar, but like the 75th percentile outcome of a guy like Betts is probably in line with the 90th percentile outcome of a guy like Will Smith. So I think these high floor, low multiplier guys are going to have a less skewed distribution, which is going to play up with a kind of true median projection. These guys, though, that have the high multipliers and kind of, can really pay off when they put up a, top quartile game for them, are going to play up more in a mean oriented projection system. So that would be my thinking there. And of course, like, early in the season, I think we're going to see some guys like, Ty France, Josh Fuentes, Yoshi Tsutsugo. I mean, these are guys with near the multiplication ceiling who are batting in, the first 2 or 3 slots in their team. Raimel Tapia batting leadoff at Coors Field, 1.55x. I know Mookie Betts is a way better, way more productive player than Tapia, but they're going to see roughly similar kind of at-bat opportunities. I think over the course of the season, I would expect pricing to catch up with some of these guys who are just staples at kind of the top of their team's lineup. But early in the season, we're seeing some new faces at the top batting orders. We're very high on, like, this, high multiplier combo of Fuentes and Tapia, who are projected to lead off, bat 1 and 2 for Colorado. It's obviously a tough matchup versus Bauer, but, great game environment, high total, guys who aren't total duds as far as a, productivity standpoint. So, I think that could be some of the thinking there.
Yeah. And it's not this simple, because fantasy stats are weighted towards power so much and you value the home run guys. But if we go by batting average, say the league average is around 250, right? And it's, in any given year, maybe 20 guys that have more than 300 batting average. So, not to say that hitters are close together in ability, but when you get a 1.7 multiplier for a hitter, it becomes quite compelling.
Yeah. So are there any stacks that you have an eye on, with that in mind, and kind of understanding the value of these high multiplier players? There any stacks that are standing out to you as potentially kind of, slate breaking stacks that could, put up like a 8 run, 8+ run performance and kind of win the slate. 6-game slate. We don't need necessarily a team to go for like 12 runs to win the slate. If we have, the right pieces in an 8-run performance, that could win a 6-game slate.
Yeah, I think my favorite stack overall is probably Oakland, and my second favorite is Seattle against Cueto, who is at a tough part of the age curve, has a chance to show up this season, but I don't know. Season-long fantasy players didn't rate him too highly this year. People think it will be a continuation of last year and the year before, which were not great. But there's always the possibility that he shows kind of some old Johnny Cueto. However, I think Seattle is a very strong stack. I think Oakland is a very strong stack. I think that the Dodgers, you can take your chances with some bizarre stacks. The lesser players go, maybe choose 3 players that have higher multipliers, that are down the order a little bit, like Smith, Muncy, Pollock, or something like that. It is likely that you have some strong offensive production there. So just try to get a little bit unusual with your stacks. And even though bets with the low multiplier is not preferred by our optimizer, it's still perfectly reasonable to be in there with, let's just say, Seager, Bellinger, Will Smith, or something like that. I do think that it's important in tournaments. Go ahead and stack the maximum when you're stacking the Dodgers, just because it will be so popular and you will have a lot of players just playing unconstrained lineups from the optimizer. It becomes hard for you to win when you have just a small subset of a stack, because you have to not only have your team LA beat all the other teams, but then you have to have your small stack subset beat all the other possible stacks within LA. I think you're better off go ahead and maxing out on LA players if you play there.
And then do you have a lean on, I know you have to drop in a sec, but with DraftKings and FanDuel, there is a wide enough, like you just get more offensive players that you can choose from. 6 is a pretty restrictive number where I don't think you necessarily have to go with 2 stacks. Like you could go 4 and then 2 one-offs. You could go 3, then 2. I don't know that I'd be super in favor of like a 3-player stack and then 3 just one-off plays. But do you have a sense of kind of how much like flexibility you want to allow with one-offs? The idea of a one-off, for those listening, is that by restricting yourself too much to a stack, you do sometimes miss on high value plays. And there can be some benefit to leaving, one-off flexibility for, a spot or 2 for kind of high projection players, such that they mixed with, a high performing stack can have, I think, tournament winning upside. Do you have a sense kind of what you want to do with, only 6 hitters available, just kind of with general stack sizing?
Well, in tournaments, you do value the sequential order of play and the fact that we have a lot of strong plays in the late games, Oakland and Seattle. I think a reasonable thing to do tonight would be to max LA, and then just take some isolated power for 1 spot, and then leave 2 spots open for the night games, knowing that you could shift around a little bit. So I think your isolated power spots, just a scattering of like Brandon Lowe and Adam Duvall in the first game, as one-offs in that game, And then if you have those guys plus LA chalk, then you kind of know what to do in the late game. If you have a homer, you play chalk in the late game and so on. And then for Colorado, you play sort of one-off power. Maybe Blackman might be a good play there. And then you save a couple of spots for the Oakland Seattle game to win. And it's also important for when you're looking at our optimizer, you have some guys that are getting there with power and some guys that are getting there with average. Even though we don't have super high totals tonight, you probably will need power to win. So that's why tonight, especially, I don't mind the strategy of max out LA and then have isolated power in your other three spots, not necessarily stacks.
Got it. Sounds good. Well, I'll be keeping that in mind as we start building lineups here in the next couple hours. It should be a fun night. I mean, this is a great time of year where basketball is still competitive, a lot of optimism, and just I think good stuff going on with baseball kicking off. Masters starting next week, so I think a really exciting time of year to play, and definitely tuning into some of those SuperDraft contests.
All right, sweet. I'll see you here on Monday.